Welcome to The Girlfriend God, a podcast in search of and in service to the divine feminine, bringing you an equal mix of academic research and emotional spiritual experience. If you enjoy this podcast, be sure to subscribe, follow, rate it, review it, and share it with your friends. Now, together, let's find the divine. Okay, welcome to episode 50 of The Girlfriend God. Today, I'm happy to welcome back to the show Monette Chilson. Monette is an excavator of our sacred feminine lineage, and she founded WomanSpirit Reclamation to support women in navigating their awakening from patriarchal indoctrination through online courses and community. She's written and spoken about the divine feminine for the past decade, authoring Sophia Rising, Awakening Your Sacred Wisdom Through Yoga, and My Name is Lilith, in addition to editing Original Resistance, Reclaiming Lilith, Reclaiming Ourselves, and developing its companion curriculum. Monette's work has been featured in national magazines, including Yoga Journal and Integral Yoga Magazine, and in the anthologies Yoga Wisdom and Whatever Works, Feminists of Faith Speak. She is passionate about travel as a spiritual portal, and you can connect to Monette's work at jointhereclamation.com and monetechilson.com, and I have a whole bunch of other links in the show notes, Monette, places to buy your book and where people can go to register for classes, and I even threw your link tree in there. So, welcome back. It's been a minute.
It has. Thank you, Kelly. It's always good to be back here.
So we had talked a little bit about, it started with your trip to Scotland. I had attended a WomanSpirit event, I think, that you did after you got back from that trip. And there was a cave that you had discovered, much to your horror, was a gross, inaccurate description of the site and who it had to do with. I don't remember all the details, but so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about your trip to Greece. We're going to talk about pilgrimages and ancient sites and how to do pilgrimages on a budget in your own backyard and the interpretive lens of the patriarchy, which is how we wind up with all these historical inaccuracies to begin with, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So do you want to start with Scotland?
Yeah, we can start with Scotland. I think that's the clearest example. I like to say I'm an excavator of our sacred feminine lineage, and what that looks like in real life, this cave is a perfect example of. So we were going to this small little hamlet on the east coast of Scotland, and we stayed there for a month, and it's called Pittenweem. And I was so excited because there was a sacred cave right across the street from where we were staying, and it was called St. Fillan's Cave. And I was like, great. So I hit the library as soon as we got there and started researching, and of course spent time in the cave. And what I found is that there's actually no real evidence linking St. Fillan to this cave. So I think this is not like a one-off, weird thing that happened. I think this is how the patriarchy reclaims sacred history.
Right.
Is at some point in it was late, I want to say the 17 or 1800s, the church really needed this abandoned cave to be legit. So they found a legit, male, appropriate saint, slapped the name on, and that's it. And when I went back, the charters of the town in the 1300s, 1400s had this cave that has a spring in the back that I spent many hours sitting by when I was there, called the Font of Mary Magdalene, or the Spring of Mary Magdalene. And it was on the charters right there. And then suddenly after the Reformation, when you looked at the same charters, new versions, it just said a certain spring, period. No Mary Magdalene. And that looking at that difference, it's like, that's how they erase us.
Right.
It's just that easy. Rename documents. All the men running it are men, and they're
Right.
Christian bishops and what have you. So I was lucky enough to get connected there with the woman who lives in the priory above the cave. She invited me to the annual meeting of the local preservation society. So I was the
Nice.
only non-local there. I mean, for sure, only everyone else was in the community. And I got to go there. I met an author who had written about the cave and written about Mary Magdalene. He's a professor at St. Andrews, which is where my son goes to college. And I just started amassing this research. And I offered the library, I said, can I write a 1-page info sheet for you to give people just so they know there is a story beneath the story? That's what I was trying to find, right? So and this timing of this interview is so great because 2 weeks ago, I realized, I get distracted by life and I had never finished that project. So I sent it to the library and they're thrilled and they're going to put it in their information center. And I feel like that was probably the most tangible example of me finding the story beneath the story, asking the questions, looking at what actually happened instead of the filtered version. And everything we get in religion, in history, is filtered through what men wanted us to know about it.
Right. I mean, I know I'm familiar with that on not necessarily in specific places. I mean, I know about some of those, but just coming from a library background, in a more general sense, we talk about who are the gatekeepers of this information, and librarians and archivists and museum curators. We were all supposed to be unbiased, but you can't help but bring your own bias to these things. And I remember there was an episode last season with Carla and someone else. Maybe it was one of those panel episodes where they talked about all the examples of when you see artifacts in a museum, things that there is evidence pointing to the fact that these are figures or statues or canvases or rock art or whatever that are goddesses, but yet the placard in the museum says woman, woman holding cornucopia, woman with horns, woman, like no.
Yeah. And the language that is used when you talk about, the gatekeepers are doing their best, but when the information and the data that's handed down is corrupt, like it takes one time back there for someone to say it. Just like now, modern day analogy, someone says something on the internet and it has a life of its own. Back then, someone who had the money and the means and was a man published something, then everyone else is citing back to the inaccurate. And so, like language, when you even think about how we describe goddess worship, I came at this when I was doing this research on the cave. They kept calling the followers of Mary Magdalene who gathered in that cave the cult of Mary Magdalene. Well, that does not sound at all as accepted and the norm and good as words they use for Christian followers of Jesus or, anyone else. It sounds like a cult, right?
Right. Because by that definition, Christendom should be the cult of Jesus.
Exactly. And people would be like, what? But you say that about goddesses and everyone's like, oh yeah. Or idolatry. Well, so it's idolatry when you're worshiping the thing they don't like, but when you're worshiping the cross with a man dying on it, it's not idolatry.
Right.
Yeah, so the language matters.
It definitely does. So, was there anything else in Scotland other than the cave that you were able to discover these kinds of things about?
Um, it's a little bit connected. I mean, it is connected to the cave. One thing I wasn't as aware until I got there is that in the burning times and the witch hunts in this very small little town, there were 17 people who were killed for witchcraft in that village. And there is I'm not going to remember the name now. We can put it in the show notes, but there is an app that I was traveling with my friend Monica at the time, that let us look up the names of the actual witches that were killed there. And then in some other things I was reading, there's no proof of this, but it is very likely, considering there's a secret staircase from the priory garden down to the cave, that witches were held there in that cave.
Right.
Before their executions. So there was a lot of that connecting to that time. And for me, there's a knowing of these things, but then also I think to process them and to process that pain and that history that is painful for women and that we still carry is ritualize it and do something. So we took that app and we went to a different cave. Actually, we just walked down the coast and found like some random caves, went in, got our app out, and we did a ceremony. And I read the names of every witch that was killed in Pittenweem, and we said, we honor you. So I think there's a knowing, and then there's a, how do I transmute and alchemize that knowing into a ritual? And I think that so many people who are new to doing ritual carry the burden of our religious heritage that tells us rituals are done a certain way and they must be A, B, C.
Right.
And if I could say anything to women is anytime you want to ritualize an experience, it is right and it is good. And it doesn't matter if you're following the right script. Yeah, I just passed this past week the anniversary of my sister's death, which is always, for me, a really embodied experience of grief. I don't care how many years have gone by, all of that returns to my body. And this year, I followed every single intuition on ritualizing and honoring that day. So that day is not anything to anyone else. And you are going to have a day for you that is like brings in that embodied memory, and every woman listening to this will. And I just created this day where I went to my little trail to town through the woods to my altar, which is a stump. And I noticed weeks and weeks ago that there's maybe when they cut down the tree, somehow there's a slit, looks like a coin slot in the trunk. And part of my ritual, I'm getting off, but I'm going to bring this back.
Yeah, that's fine.
Part of my ritual that day was the symbol and the sign that my sister gives me is these, the little washers or the nuts that you find on the road. So we used to call her MacGyver because she was could fix anything out of nothing. And I got to back up one more time. So when like 2 days after she died, I was trying to be tooth fairy for my son, who was like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, maybe he was 10 at the time. And I couldn't find the tooth. And I was barely functioning as a human being at that point. And I was standing in his room crying, looking for the tooth. And I felt something brush my hair and hit the ground next to me, like it fell from above me. And I reached down and there was a bolt, and right next to the bolt was a tooth. So after that, this is how the language evolved for me. After that, she gave me both the first night, and then it was the washers and the nuts. So every time I found one, it was Angie. So I have amassed quite a collection of these messages. So for my ritual, I inserted them into the slot, goes way back into the tree. I inserted those into the tree and did my own ritual. No one else would ever make up such a ritual. It was absolutely perfect for me.
Right. Well, we have to do things that are meaningful to us. I mean, I've been making up my own rituals for years. I mean, if I find something in antiquity that's like, oh, this is how the priestesses in this particular age did it, of course I want to replicate that. But much of what's in antiquity we can't replicate, right?
Exactly.
So we have to come up with things that feel right for us. I mean, like I said, as an archivist and an information driven person, uh, if I want to do a ritual about something, I will do my due diligence and research to see if there's a historical document that I can borrow from. But mostly, especially finding my way on the spiritual path that I'm on now, I couldn't find someone that had been where I was that had written anything about it, right? So I had to make it up.
Yeah.
I had to make it up as I went
Yeah.
along. Um, so when you were in Scotland,
Uh,
and you said that you spent a lot of time just sitting by the spring. So I wonder if you could share with me a bit about your emotional spiritual experience, because I love to talk about that on this show.
Yeah, I had several different experiences in the cave. Um, I spent a lot of time, especially when I was in the back of the cave by the spring, thinking about what it would have been like to have been one of Mary Magdalene's followers sitting there. And she was not there herself, but it was the people that followed her and revered her. And it felt very peaceful, and it just felt very sacred. I mean, there's an energy when you enter a place, and
Yes.
I think different people pick up on different things. And then there was also a night when I was down there, because I did befriend the woman who lived in the priory, and she did give me permission anytime to go through her secret staircase down. And she left a light because it's dark down there, a big light that we could use.
Yeah.
And we went down there one night. It was the one night that I had two friends. Monica was there for a week, and then my friend Suzanne came just for a few days. And so the three of us were like, let's go down to the cave at night. And Suzanne is a classically trained opera singer. And so we really wanted to go down and let Suzanne sing and reverberate. And, I had this image of what it was going to be like. But we got down to the bottom of the staircase, and there's a little fence that's meant to, I guess, keep random visitors from going up to the garden.
Right.
So I immediately get to the fence. I step over it. I'm on the other side, and it's pitch dark. And Monica just, she was like, Monette, come back. And I was like, what? And she was like, come back now. And so finally I could sense the urgency. And so I got back over the fence. We went back up, and she was like, I felt like I had been in that place looking at you in the cave before. Like that's where the witches were held, as I said before. And it was this moment where I didn't feel it as much as Monica did, but she's like, I have been here before looking at you in that cave before. And I was like, okay, all right. So, you never know what you're going to find.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we have that either, I mean, we do have memories from our past lives, so
Mm-hmm.
perhaps you and she have a past life connection.
Perhaps.
And we also have ancestral memory,
Mm-hmm.
right? So your ancestor, her ancestor,
Exactly.
same time, same place,
Yeah. Yep.
same time of night.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing to me when those things happen. And
Yeah.
I feel like, just jumping ahead a little to the pilgrimage on a budget, right?
Uh,
uh, Places that have that feeling for you, even if they're not on a historic registry, even if they're not, you know what I mean? Because sometimes, just like you go to a place you've never been before
mm-hmm.
and it moves something in
Yes.
you. And it doesn't matter what it is, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? If it's the
Yeah.
past life recall
Yeah.
or ancestral memory or muscle memory or whatever.
Yeah.
The feeling is what matters. How does it make you feel?
Yes. And I will say this is like akin to the radical permission. I was talking about women knowing they can create their own ritual, knowing they can define their own pilgrimage. And it doesn't have to be the thing that you read about everywhere. In fact, I would say if you are planning some kind of pilgrimage, when I am traveling anywhere, I will not buy a regular old travel guidebook. No, I actually probably want to go to the opposite place that everyone
Right.
else is going, right?
Right.
I'm going to Barcelona in about a week.
Okay.
because my son, who's in college in St. Andrews, is running the marathon there. So instead of buying like the regular guidebook, this is a series I adore. And it is called Powerful Places In. And I want to say they have maybe 8 or 9. It's a couple. I don't know if they're actually married or not, probably. And they travel around and they talk about the feeling of the place. And they give you
Nice.
guidelines for sitting there, for asking permission to come into the sacred space. And there are times that in Scotland, but other side of Scotland, different trip, in their book about, well, their powerful places in Scotland, right? They
Right.
had mentioned in there a grove of trees near a castle and near a completely, when I say a stone circle, people are picturing like Stonehenge tourists. No, this is like a
Right.
cow pasture with like 8 standing stones, like in the middle of nowhere. You'd have to walk a
Right.
mile. I mean, nowhere. And I just lost my train of thought. Why was I telling?
About the way places feel, and that was in the
Oh,
book.
oh, oh, yes, yes, yes. So they mentioned in there a grove of trees that had a certain energy, but like you can't tell which grove of tree it is. So instead of getting caught up in like looking at the guidebook, do you think they meant this? We were walking along toward the stone circle. There were 3 of us. And all of a sudden, we all just veered off the path towards these trees. And we were like, do you think these are the trees? And we were like, well, they are now. They're the trees. And
Right.
they felt energetically special to us. It didn't matter if they were the trees that someone else meant. Um, so it's that trusting that off the beaten path kind
Right.
of, if you're drawn to something, you're drawn to something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I try and live my life that way, right? If I feel an impulse to do
Absolutely.
something, I'm going to do it,
Absolutely.
right?
And
To go to this place, talk to this
yes,
person, answer
yes,
the phone, don't answer the phone,
right.
right?
Yes. And when you're
We
talking about the pilgrimaging on a budget, what I hadn't even thought, this was probably my first experience that I would call pilgrimage. And I have definitions that I wrote. Just I'm going to throw that out there so we know what we're talking about.
Mhm.
I've done several presentations on this, and my meaning of pilgrimage is a journey of intention made to seek the deeper meaning, the sacred, or the magic of a place. So
I think that's a perfect definition.
I think so. And it leaves a lot of room for individual experience. So
Right.
this one I'm thinking of, which was very much on a budget, very much not planned ahead. The fact that it even happened, it was probably 8 years ago. Yeah, about 8 years ago. So I still had kids at home. Everyone I went with had kids at home. It wasn't like easy to just like jump in a car and go on a pilgrimage, but we
Right.
went to hear a lecture on Celtic spirituality. And whoever was giving the lecture mentioned a place in New Harmony, Indiana called the Roofless Church. And all of us had the same reaction in our body. We looked at each other and we were like, I think we're supposed to go there.
Mhm.
And we didn't even know, like, I mean, we're in Texas at that time. I'm in North Carolina now. I lived in Texas. It's a long ass way to New Harmony, Indiana. And we started
Yeah.
researching it, and it's known as a thin place. And many people over the years have come, artists, there's sculptures, there's the roofless church itself is more like, it looks like the ruins of a church with just parts of the walls standing. And we actually, a few weeks after that, we managed to get in a car and drive. And we would ask Siri along the way, where am I? What state am I in? Like, we didn't even know. We just had the GPS going. And
Uh-huh.
some of the states we went through, we were like, huh, didn't know we were going to go through that state. And we arrived there at like midnight, and there was not a soul around. And we laid down on the grass in the roofless church and looked up. There were 3 of us, and we were holding hands, and a falling star went
Mm.
across the sky. And at that moment, holding hands, we just made a vow to always make space in our lives for things
Right.
like this. And for that, that's a super hard thing for women. I mean, it's a hard thing for anyone, but to vow, no matter how grand or how simple, that it is a priority for you. Like earlier today, I went out and laid on a blanket in the front yard for no reason other than my body was like, go lay on a blanket in the
Yep.
sunshine. Follow those intuitions.
Right.
And yeah.
So, I live right next door to Indiana. So this is now, this is now,
I mean,
we'll have to see how far New Harmony is. I mean, Indianapolis is about 2.5 hours. So if it's within 2 hours of that, that's a day trip.
I think you need, yeah. It was really, and I don't use Thin Place lightly, but that place there was some magic there. Even beyond that first night, there was the grounds, like we just wandered around and there was art everywhere. And there was a tiny, like size of my dining room table, chapel, like a white stucco chapel out in the middle of nowhere. And it was locked. And we said, well, I guess we could ask if anyone has the key. So we went back to the hotel and we said, does anyone have a key to that old chapel back there? And she was like, oh, sure. She pulls out a skeleton key, like right up my magic heart alley. And we took the skeleton key out there, opened the chapel, went in, and like there was some old dusty like song sheets in there. And we just like kind of scavenged and took our own bits and did a little service in there.
Nice.
Yeah.
So it's 2 hours and 56 minutes for me. So thinking that's a day trip.
I'm thinking yes. And that's one thing I want to do more of, Kelly, is everyone, wherever you live, there is a sacred history. Here, it's going to be more for me in the mountains of North Carolina. The Native American history is very strong here. Cherokee is near here, the town, which has a huge, visitor center. But I would say a technique or a tool when you're going to a sacred site and you want to see the story beneath the story instead of the story that's handed to you, is don't follow the prescribed itinerary. Right? You go, you've done your own research. You kind of know there's like a mound over here, like you were talking about the mound you want to go to, right?
Right. The Serpent Burial Mound in Ohio.
So there's always that going on around it. And for example, in Scotland, it was on the same trip that we went to the Stone Circle and all of that. That was the Isle of Mull. And there is a smaller island called the Isle of Iona that is pretty well known as the birthplace of Christianity in the West. So it had, a famous monastery on it, lots of Celtic history, but it was very much superimposed by the church. So we went there, you get off the ferry, everyone else goes left to the big fancy visitor center. Our little band of renegades goes right to the ruins of the nunnery, where there is a very weathered Sheila gig that we knew was there. We didn't know exactly where. We probably spent 15 minutes running around the nunnery, examining all the stones until Katya, who was our friend who lives on Mull, sticks her head through the ruins of a window and says, I found her. And the Sheila gig is the woman splaying open, mostly in Ireland, but there are a few in Scotland, and it's so well. But I can't tell you the joy it gave me to think of the nuns, who honestly at that time, if you were a woman and wanted to have an independent life, that's probably a pretty good place to be. And then you put your, irreverent little hidden symbol above your windows and doors. I love that.
Yeah. So let's move on to Greece.
Yeah. So I think the overarching thing that struck me about Crete, because I was only on Crete, I went on a goddess pilgrimage with the Ariadne Institute. So that is Carol Christ's organization. She founded decades and decades ago. Thousands of women have been on that. If you're a Sumont Kid fan,
Mhm.
When she wrote Dance of the Dissident Daughter,
Uh-huh.
she details bits of her experience with the pilgrimage
Right.
there.
All right. I remember that.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the pilgrimage. I mean, it's legendary. She died 2 years ago, and she left the pilgrimage to Laura Shannon, who now heads the Ariadne Institute. So I went on
Mhm.
that. Um, and what struck me about Crete is it's another really good example because its matriarchal roots stayed active at least 1,000 years longer than, say, Europe. So, as difficult as it is, still possible in Europe to find those stories. They're just closer to the surface on Crete. And there's been some wonderful excavations, different types. They might call them temples, they might call them city centers, or they've been excavated. Different people have different names. Some of them were excavated and restored, which has a beauty in itself because you can really see it more.
Right.
Some of them were just excavated and like purist, like let's don't touch it. So both were interesting, but I was remembering one example at Knossos, which is one of the big sites that has actually it's had more work done to it than most.
Mhm.
And several things are like still in my mind from that visit. I mean, first of all, when you walk up, there's a bronze sculpture of a man's head, which pissed me off, a white man's head. You know, Sir Arthur Evans, who was, he's the one that gets credit for the excavation. But of course, people who lived on Crete had done a lot of the legwork, but he swooped in with his money and bought it and did what he wanted with it. I'm not saying he didn't make great contributions, but again, it was just like a glare. I was like, are you kidding me? Like,
Mhm.
for Arthur Evans, great. Not really who I want to hear from.
Right.
And we had a fabulous an archaeologist who was a woman, who was a local, who had actually played at Knossos before it was quite as sectioned off, and there weren't as many
Mhm.
rules. Like, we went into the throne room, which is a whole nother story. Like, they call it the throne room. Um, but it could have been more of an area where decisions were communally made based on some of the evidence.
Right.
And there was the throne, when you actually study the dimensions and the way the seat is shaped, it
Hmm.
indicates that it was made for a woman,
Mm.
not for a man. I mean, the
Mhm.
archaeologist explained it very well, but I
Mhm.
could totally see that. So if there was someone presiding, it was a woman, but that
Mhm.
is still not the dominant story that's told.
Right.
And there is, I mean, in this day and age, there is shaming of women scholars by other women
Hmm.
still like have the patriarchal veil.
Right.
So one of our guides on the tour, Joan, and this is horrible that I'm having a blank on Joan's last name. She did her doctoral thesis on the matriarchal evidence in Crete of that civilization. And if you go on like the academic sites where at first reviews were published of it,
Hmm.
people are totally questioning the academic authority of those assertions based on uh it's not what was always said.
Right.
It's a different version, it's a different lens, and it's
Right.
very hard to break through that even with legitimate research.
Right. Well, I mean, the best example of that is Maria Gimbutas, right? I mean,
Exactly.
leader in her field,
Yes.
and for decades has been discredited by male scholars. Why?
Yeah.
Because she gave us evidence of a goddess civilization that was essentially the beginning of everything. So, and I'm just like, I don't, yeah.
Yeah. And her archives, exist
Hmm.
alongside Joseph Campbell's at
Right.
Pacifica. And you know, one is revered as like this, and hers are kind of a side note. And I mean, her stuff is every bit as revolutionary, if not more. Yeah.
I read, this is kind of a side note, but I read something just yesterday. I found this book, which is obviously somebody's um, PhD dissertation, that was written in 1977 by a woman named uh, Willa Chu, and it's called uh, the the Goddess, a Religion of the Mind. Yeah, super interesting. But it had this quote in it that really struck me. It's interesting, sometimes you read old books and you're like, this is so timely that I'm reading this now, even though it was written in 1977. And everything that she was saying, I was like, yes, yes, this is where we are. This is where we are in our human evolution and the evolution of global consciousness. And I mean, it was eerie. But she had this quote that said, and I'm going to misattribute it because I didn't make a note of who it was from. I think it was Robert Graves.
Mm.
Uh, and in The White Goddess, he said, only after a period of complete political and religious disorganization can the suppressed desire of the Western races, which is for some practical form of goddess worship, will her love, not limited to maternal benevolence and her afterworld, not deprive us of a sea, find satisfaction at last. And I think, is that where we're at now, this political and religious disorganization? I don't know.
Sounds
I mean, I think we're at least at the beginning, but I don't know if expect to see the completion of that in our lifetime.
yeah.
Maybe in your children's or grandchildren's lifetime.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's just, well, and we've talked about on this show before, right? That, this idea that power hides in plain sight, and it's just the patriarchy it's just been our norm for so long.
Yes. Yeah. I had
It's
a
really hard to get people who don't know about ancient history or know about the kinds of things that you and I know about. It's really hard to really get people to like wake up to that. Yes, there's evidence of that yes, there's a global shift in consciousness happening, and more people are waking up, and the world's going to look totally different by 2030, and money's not going to be a thing, and capitalism's failing, and you know what I mean? All of that. But then I wonder, because we're so inundated by social media and everything is so targeted to us, I think, okay, are my news feeds just full of things that I believe? And it's just reinforcing what I already believe instead of giving me a differing view.
yeah. And when you can it's easy to feel overwhelmed in the face of all that.
Mhm.
So I'm going to do the same thing that we did with pilgrimages, like bringing it back to home. Like, what can
Right.
you do in your own little sphere to not overthrow that, but to speak up when it doesn't resonate?
Right.
Like, I'm thinking of a couple of examples. The last couple of years, like family prayers at Thanksgiving, when
Uh-huh.
everyone stands around and holds hands, my mom has said, can you please do like a goddess friendly prayer?
Uh-huh.
And like that's something I can do, probably make some people uncomfortable. I don't really care. It's a way I can speak my truth into my own small familial circle. And like
Mhm.
maybe 2 weeks ago, if even, had a conversation with my husband. He loves Richard Rohr. I like a lot of things Richard Rohr does. I mean, as far as Christian contemplative, wisdom, he's got some stuff going on. But he had in his weekly or no daily, I think he does a daily email. I don't ever read them. My husband will often forward if it's something he thinks would resonate with me.
Mhm.
He said, oh, did you read that really good one? I was like, no, I didn't. And he read it to me. And in it, Rohr quotes like the 13th century mystic Meister Eckhart. And it's this poem that literally starts, Kelly. It says, Father God laughed and gave birth to his son. His son gave birth to the Holy Spirit. And then Greg went on to read the rest of the email, which may or may not have been good, but
Mm-hmm.
you lost me when you took women out of
Mm-hmm.
the equation. Like you actually made a man giving birth to a son. And so I
Mm-hmm.
said, he's like, oh, what'd you think? And I was like, well, I think it wasn't meant for me. I think it didn't include me. I said, if you want something to resonate, like I said, and kindly, I said, did you think about how I might feel? He's like, I actually did. And that's the blinders. Like
Right.
this
Right.
was a progressive Christian contemplative that was bringing in ideas. So he thought it's good, but I'm like, no, look at that. I'm left out of the story. And he was like, oh, I can see that now. But what if I had just done the thing women are taught to do and like, oh, well, I'm not going to rock the boat. I'll just nod and say, no, he's going to think twice next time before he brings me something. He's going to say, are women reflected in this? And most of the time, if it's Christian, they're not.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I'm not complaining. Okay. So back to Crete.
Mm-hmm.
You made me think of a long time ago. I haven't looked, so I don't know if it's still in existence. But in addition to, not following the tourist trap or going with the crowd or whatever, and when you get off the tour bus, everybody goes left,
Yeah.
you take a right. There used to be a website, it's probably still out there or something like it, called livelikealocal.com.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hints about all the places to stay so that you could live like a local, and like these kind of out of the way funky neighborhoods, and or like historic districts or places that weren't where the Marriott and the hotels and everything else was. And especially now with Airbnb, I think your odds of being able to find that are much better than they used to be if you want to go off the beaten path
Yes.
and talk to the people who actually live there.
So this, my other book, because I'm in the midst of my Barcelona planning. So in addition to the powerful places, I bought this one that is called Secret Barcelona. And the little
Nice.
tagline down here is local guides by local people. So that's probably the
Nice.
book version of your website.
Right, right.
And there are so many things in here that are not big, impressive things. They cost no money, but it's noticing the little placard on the side that has the snake. That means this. And this was a Masonic thing. And this
Right.
chapel that's tucked behind the flower vendor through this courtyard is actually a chapel dedicated to Saint Anne, who was Mary's mother, who I had not ever seen anything consecrated and dedicated to her until Crete. And there was a site or two we went to that had the little icons, the gold. I wish I had mine down here. It's on my altar, but it has like the gold leaf and the very Byzantine looking versions of the saint.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And at first glance, you would think it was Mary with Jesus, but when you look closely, it's Anne with Mary.
mm-hmm.
And so it's the mother line. And so there's a little chapel
Nice.
that is talked about in here that I'm going to go to. And I mean, you can't make this up. Not that the church dates are significant to me, but on March 16th, so we will still be there, was a church day that was known. If you visited this church, it had the same power as making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem because of some, I don't even know. But I was like, I told my husband, I'm like, we're going to be here on this day. We're going to go to that chapel on this day. And that's not going to cost anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I attribute it to the way I was raised. I lived next to New York my whole life, and my parents have always they instilled in me a sense of adventure and the off the beaten path. My parents had this unique talent for discovering these places in the village, and then like the next week they'd be written up in the Village Voice, and then you couldn't get anywhere near the place. And you know what I mean? Like, I mean, of course, we did the things like we went to the Guggenheim and we went to Broadway and stuff
Right.
like that, but they took us into Soho and they took us into the Village and they took us into the gay neighborhoods, and you know what I mean? So, like, my parents have never set foot in probably a Hard Rock Cafe or a Rainforest Cafe in their lives, right?
Yes.
It's just not their thing. So I love that I have that
Yes.
and I try and get my wife, who was raised on chain restaurants and tourist attractions, that when we go somewhere that we haven't been before,
Mhm.
she'll just look at me and be like, "Going on an adventure, aren't we?" Yes,
Uh-huh.
yes, we
Don't
are,
you love
because what
that
better
we
way there is to live, right?
Yes. And I think we both had parents that we inherited that from. That's such a gift. My dad was the same way. Like he was the backroads king. In fact, the fact that I'm living in this part of North Carolina now is directly attributed to a fabulous vacation he planned for us when I was engaged to my husband 30 plus years ago. We weren't even married yet. Brought us all up here. We had a great time. And Greg and I were like, oh my gosh, I think this is our place. And it is our
Nice,
place.
nice. Yeah, what a gift. What a
Yep.
gift. I mean, I shun the tourist industry anyway. So that's why my parents, I mean, as detestable as Florida is these days, they hang on to that place in Cocoa Beach because there's no fucking tourists there.
I love that.
Yeah.
You know what I saw last night that made me think when you were talking about your parents taking you to places like Soho before it was a big thing? Have
Hmm.
you watched the Ruth Bader Ginsburg movie On the Basis of Sex?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
somehow I missed the boat and I just watched it last night. And there's a place where oh, the woman who plays the older woman
Uh-huh.
who Ruth goes to try to get her support in doing
Right.
this legislation and everything. She says, she's looking at her, not her email, but she's looking at something that came across her desk. She's like, Soho, what a weird name. Like, who made up that? It just made me think of that
Right.
connection. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in part of my story, I mean, I grew up queer in a time when it wasn't like it is today.
Right.
So we had to know those little out of the way places in the village and in Soho and where we could meet and be safe. So
Yeah.
that kind of added to that, you got to go down. And like I said, my parents have always been into this. I remember there was a restaurant somewhere in the village and it was called One If by Land, Two If by Sea, which my mother was obsessed with going with because apparently to
Uh-huh.
find it, you had to walk up and down the street and look for the doorway that didn't have a number on it. Like that was how you found the place.
Is it
I don't know
still
why
there?
that just, I'm sorry.
Is it still there?
I don't know.
Because my son um is in college in Scotland, but his girlfriend lives in New York. And I want to say they went to a restaurant. It was like part of his Christmas gift. We paid for them. And I
Mhm.
think that's what it was called. I'm going to have to go confirm that.
One If by Land, Two If by Sea. Yeah, I
Yep.
don't know why, of all the memories, that one just stuck in my head because
So
she was so
funny.
obsessed with going there.
Yeah,
Um, but these are the parents that I was raised with, right?
exactly.
And they
Yeah.
took us to off Broadway in addition to Broadway and off Broadway. I'm feeling nostalgic. I'm gonna go visit my parents in probably late spring this year. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but anyway, that kind of got off on a tangent there. So pilgrimages on a budget. We've touched on that a little bit, but do you have practical recommendations? Because you know me well enough to know some of the details of my personal life, and
Yeah.
my wife and I are not in a position to. I've never been out of the country. I think it's unlikely I will ever go out of the country, so I have to make do with what we have here.
I think some of the things we've touched on today, which is looking at what is and was considered sacred around you hundreds, thousands years ago. Do your own research before you go. Don't just go and take the thing they hand you and follow it. Like, read about it and not just keep it in your head, but like meditate on it and figure out how you want to experience it as sacred. I mean, I think it's
Right.
perfect for you that the roofless church is within driving distance. There is so much you can read about that. So just start researching around you and see what sparks something in you, even if you don't know why. Research
Right.
it, go see it. There's a beautiful description. Let me see if I can. In every one of these Powerful Places books, I love it because they do it in every single book. I wish I would have marked it. They kind of walk you through how to experience a sacred site. Let's see. Oh, I'm not going to be able to find it quickly. But there's a process, and I've done a version of it, like with that grove of trees that I was talking about that we discovered. We're like, is this the grove? Is it just a grove?
Right.
Out there, we spent a long time, and this was like an intuitive thing. So there were three of us, and we didn't say a word. We just walked around and put our hands on the trees and like checked in with them.
Right.
And that's something you can do even not at any kind of a special sacred site around you or anything. I mean, I
Right.
take a walk once or twice a week through the woods to town, and I will stop and put my hands on the trees, and I will go into the clearing and sit. And that is something you can do as a practice, because I usually use pilgrimaging, but I also use a word called portaling, because I do feel like when you get in a certain mind space, you
Right.
leave like the physical hard, this is a chair, you leave it and you go to a kind of different place. And you can do that anywhere in your backyard, at the park. Nature is a huge touchstone. Today, when I was laying out on the blanket, for some reason, this little acorn cap, and there were many around me, caught my eyes, and I just like stared at it and looked at it and thought the design is so beautiful. So I brought it in for my altar. Why? I have no idea.
Right. I often put random shit on my altar for no other
Yeah,
reason than this was a cool rock. This was, I think she'll like this. I don't,
yeah,
you know.
right. So just trusting that flow. Um, One thing I did, let's see if I pulled out everything related to pilgrimaging and portaling. I did a really comprehensive presentation on this, and I'm going to just share some of this. So I had a couple of definitions to differentiate between pilgrims afar and pilgrims at home. So I said
Okay.
pilgrims afar see new things with their eyes, right? You see new things, that's cool. But pilgrims at home see things new with their eyes. Same thing. You may be looking
Mm-hmm.
at the same tree, at the same landscape, at the same mountain. When you lose that hard gaze, you see
Mm-hmm.
things differently. The same
Right.
thing. Yeah.
Right.
And then I also, it was a really good exercise for me to break down some of the lessons and the tools that I have gained from going on pilgrimages, and the mindset I have to get into to make them feel that way. Because if you have a super strict hierarchical, patriarchal agenda, this is how it goes, you have to really go with the flow. So I'm gonna read that. There's 6 things that I put. Rethink mistakes. So on a pilgrimage, there are no mistakes. You trust that the plans that go awry are for a reason. So like when we arrived on the Isle of Mull, Monica and I had a hurt foot. I could walk, but I limped. There were no rental cars to be had. We were at a house in the middle of nowhere. Monica was truly beginning to hyperventilate a little bit. And our host, Katya, had actually been asking the universe to send her women friends because she's on a remote island, lonely as hell. And
Mm-hmm.
she's like, we started talking about our conundrum. And she said later, I was looking at Monette limping. I was looking at Monica panicking. And I thought, these are the women. They have been sent to me. So Katya
Yeah.
ended up driving us around. She went to go clean a cottage. So we went, Monica helped. I didn't help because I was limping. And they like had to fix some plumbing up the side of the mountain. And we just went along for like, could anyone have planned that was going to be our agenda? No. But was it
Right.
perfect? Absolutely.
Right.
And like leave room for the magic. One day we found blueberries. I don't know how to make blueberry pie. Katya does. She calls them brambles, not blueberries. So we went home and we made a bramble pie. It was lovely. And find meaning. So if you see something, I had on the Isle of Mull, I jotted down every animal we saw,
Mm.
like looked up symbolism and interpreted it in my life. Why were those deer showing up? Why did we see slugs everywhere we went? Why
Right.
this? Why that? So find meaning. Excavate. So there's always a story beneath the story. Don't take the brochure. Like do your
Right.
research. Go with the flow. If you have resistance coming up to your plans not working, just sit with that and figure out what door might be opening. I'm big on doors closed, doors open. It's not good, it's not bad. It's just
Right.
the goddess is guiding your journey and you can trust it. And intuit. So don't let the logic trump your intuition. And I was specifically thinking about the trees there. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter if that's the truth and the fact.
Right.
Live in a place of accepting the sacred that comes to you. Yeah.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Did you have some quotes that you wanted to share?
Oh, yes. I love Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and I will pick this one.
And who is she?
Woman Who Run with Wolves.
Oh, okay.
Queen of mythology. She's so
Right on.
beautiful at interpreting things in this way that I'm talking about instead of
Right.
like face value. She's done so much great work with myth. So this is what she says. I'll tell you right now, the doors to the world of the wild self are few but precious. If you have a deep scar, that is a door. If you have an old story, that is a door. If you love the sky and the water so much you almost cannot bear it, that is a door. If you yearn for a deeper life, a full life, a sane life, that is a door. And what I liked about that is everything that's in you, you can trust is leading you somewhere. If you are so drawn to the woods behind your house that you want to go out there every day, that is where you need to go. I think it was Molly Remmer, who we do a lot of work with, was drawn to, I think it was a rock, but it might have been a tree. Whatever it was, she kind of made a vow to herself that she was going to take herself there every day for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so she learned. And it was like not a special rock, but it was a rock that she was drawn to. So I think the longings you have to see things near and far, like you can trust those longings and those are a door.
Right. I've done I've done a different version of that where I'll find something in the yard and like a big limb that has fallen from a tree or whatever and take pictures of it for a year or 6 months
Yeah.
and see how it changes and see how it changes through the seasons and see what creatures like to hang out there and
Right.
what else grows on it if I
Yes.
leave it sitting in the yard or yeah. So
Yeah.
that's fun too.
Simple things. This doesn't have to be a big, huge expedition across the globe. We're doing it now. We do a vow of faithfulness class every once in a while. And so I've revisited my vow. And a part of my vow was to return to these places regularly and also to tell the stories that want to be told, which was really why, in truth, I finally revisited that cave story and finally sent it off to the library so they could use it, because I read my vow and I was like, I totally abandoned that story that wanted to be told through me. And so I returned to it. And I mean, that's a great example of, we have lots of stories in our head like, oh, it's too late, I waited too long, they're not going to remember me.
Right.
I didn't do it right. No, I just like revived it, revised it, and sent it, and it was received the way I wanted it to be. So
Right. Well, and if
yeah,
everything is in divine order, that's exactly when you were supposed to do that. So
exactly. Right. Yeah.
All right. Anything that we didn't get to talk about that you still want to talk about?
Oh gosh. I think we gave a really good, hopefully an invitation to people to step into this way. I will say one thing we have coming up. I know this is going to air in April. So this is something that's coming up in the summer. We have, as a community, Woman Spirit has tried to do a lot of work around helping women recognize signs and symbols and myth and their power in women's lives. So
Mm-hmm.
we're going to do this whole summer called the Summer of Symbology. And I think
Ooh.
I think we're going to have, I think Roxy Sewell, who's one of our
Mm-hmm.
members who teaches a
I
lot
know
around
Roxy.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Roxy's probably going to lead 1 month. I'm going to lead 1 month, and Dominique's going to lead 1 month. And I think Roxy's will probably be more on accessing myth, like the myths we're given and making them powerful tools. And I
Mm-hmm.
know mine's going to be more about the signs that we receive in our life and how to kind of create your own liturgy and your own scripture through
Mm-hmm.
the signs you receive.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's going to be a fun summer, and we'll have, like I said, different teachers, and just hopefully give women a lot of tools and a lot of doorways, as Clarissa Piccola Estes says, a lot of doorways to step
Right.
through in
Right.
what way feels aligned for you. Yeah.
Just as a side note, when you talked about symbols and symbiology and these different signs, this is just a fun fact for you to perhaps investigate. So I'm a big fan of cemeteries, and the older and more unkempt, the better. And many years ago, I bought this book. I don't know if it's still in print. I don't know if you can find it, but it's called The Iconography of Death. And it's a catalog of things that you will see from different cultures and cemeteries around the world, and what some of those symbols mean. Like, I didn't know that, and I can't remember what the difference is, but like when people have angels on their tombstones, it means something different um, if they're looking upward, if they're looking downward, their hands clasped, as opposed to if they have their hands at the side. It's one of the most fascinating things I've ever read. And because I love cemeteries so much, um, I thought that I would share that with you, because I know that you're into iconography like I am. And
I just,
it's a great book. I bought it at this place that sadly isn't there anymore, but
yeah.
in Springfield, which is only an hour or 20 minutes from me, in Springfield, Illinois, because we're land of Lincoln out here, up by where the Lincoln Museum and all that other stuff is. There used to be a place called the Museum of Funerary Customs.
Wow.
And I went up there many years ago to a grave robbing exhibit, which was super cool. And I bought that book in their gift shop. And the other thing about that, and this is really way off topic, but it was just such a delightful experience. In the gift shop, they had homemade by somebody that was on the staff chocolate truffles that were little caskets with a little mummy inside. And they were delicious.
See, following your holy curiosities.
Right. And that was one of those things that I bought those and I sent them to my mother, because I thought I'm never going to find anything like this ever again in my entire
Yeah,
life. And because they're so off the beaten path, I thought she'll get a charge out of this. But yes,
exactly.
that is a perfect example of one of those things of, when else am I going to have the opportunity to go to a grave robbing exhibit at the Museum of
Right.
Funerary Customs? I
Exactly.
had a blast. So,
Yep.
well, here's to following our curiosity and doing what feels right. And I do feel like more and more women are learning how to tap into their intuition and be aware of those things. Like, if you want to say yes, say fucking yes. And if you have an intuition that you want to say no, say hell no.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And it starts there. And the same
Yeah.
is true of our spiritual lives. If this feels right to you, do it. If
Yes.
it doesn't, don't.
Right.
If it
Yes.
seems like this person who's proclaiming to be an expert in such and such witchcraft or whatever, we see a lot of that in witchcraft circles. If you don't believe that person, and you can't, if they can't, you know me, if they can't cite some source documentation to back up what they're saying,
Right.
you have the right to just be like, you know what, I think that's a bunch of bullshit, and I'm going to go this way.
Absolutely. And like when you go on a trip, I see this with women a lot, like, oh, I don't know that area. I wouldn't know where to go. I wouldn't know where to start. The places I've been that I've had the most magical experiences, I've never been. I just do my research. I trust my instincts and I go for it. And there are mishaps. Like if you think there are not going to be mishaps, I mean, the last trip to Scotland, we wanted to go to this tiny little island, the Isle of May. You can see it from the mainland, from Pittenweem.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I booked us on this nice ferry to go over there. And we had packed our lunches and our books and our journals. We get to the port and they said, oh, are you on the rib? And I said, well, I don't know what a rib is, but I'm on the ferry. And they said, oh, the ferry's been booked up for 6 months. You must be on the rib. And I was like, what's that? A rubber inflatable, I don't even remember the B. I don't know, but it's like a big inflatable boat that's going on the ocean, and they give you full foul weather gear that covers all of you. And all of us look like big orange Oompa Loompas. We got on there. Monica, my friend that was traveling with me, and my daughter were looking at me like, oh. And Monica said, she said it'd be fun. She said, you know, but we laughed so hard. We were soaked. We didn't even get off of the thing onto the island because only the ferry people are allowed to get off because it's protected and only 100 people a day can go on. So we literally went out on a rubber boat, bouncing across the ocean, went around the island and back. So that stuff happens, but you know what? It's best if you just laugh about it. It's
yeah. All right, Monette. Well, it was nice to be with you again.
You too, Kelly.
I'm glad that I was able to put you in tail end of this season because somebody else kept blowing me off. So their misfortune, my fortune, because I got to be with you.
Yes.
So you know that I'm gonna do the rude Zoom thing and the screen's gonna go black. But I will be in touch.
Okay.
But until then, as always, I wish you the peace and the love of the goddess.
Back to you, Kelly.
Okay, Monette.
Okay.
Talk soon.
Bye.
Thanks for watching or listening to The Girlfriend God. Don't forget to like, rate, review, subscribe, follow, and comment. Episodes drop every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and you can follow The Girlfriend God on social media on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.